Welcome to Silent Secrets. Today I want you to imagine this. What happens when the voice they thought they controlled suddenly disappears? She expected drama. She expected guilt. She expected the chaos of your chase, but instead, she got silence. And that silence rewrote the entire story. Because it's not always the noise that breaks control. It's the stillness. They prepared for your apology, your explanations, your pursuit, but not for your absence. Silence isn't a pause. Silence is the pivot. It doesn't ask for attention. It exposes entitlement. And the moment you stop defending, proving, and explaining, you don't lose power. You finally hold it. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength, and silence is the clearest proof of that. Silence isn't revenge. It isn't manipulation. It's restraint with purpose. It's presence without noise. And when you master it, everything begins to shift. Because silence doesn't just remove chaos. It reveals who was feeding off your reactions, who needed your energy just to feel in control. In this video, I'll show you exactly how to flip the dynamic, not through anger or force, but through discipline. 8 lessons forged in Stoic fire, designed to free you from emotional games forever. But before we dive in, anchor this truth right now. Drop a 1 in the comments if your silence was ever misunderstood. Drop a 2 if your silence turned out to be the loudest thing you ever said. Like this video to own your silence. And subscribe to Stoic Station for daily mastery in peace, power, and presence. Now, let's begin. Because the moment you stopped reacting was the moment they lost control. They lost control the moment you withdrew. They had a map of your emotions. They knew which buttons to press, when to pull back, and how to keep you uncertain just enough to stay close. A delayed reply here, a sarcastic remark there, a mix of withdrawal and attention that kept you chasing. You would defend, explain, over-communicate, try to fix what they deliberately kept breaking. That reaction wasn't weakness. It was care. But to them, it was leverage. And then one day, without warning, you didn't react. You didn't explain. You didn't play the game. And in that moment, their illusion of control shattered. Because people who thrive on manipulation don't feed off love. They feed off your reaction, your anger, your confusion, your desperate attempt to hold the connection together. But silence? Silence starves that entire system. It cuts off the emotional power supply at its root. Suddenly, they're left with no rhythm, no read, no way to predict your next move. The one who used to lead the dance is now stumbling, refreshing their phone, pacing, wondering why everything feels out of sync. You didn't slam the door. You didn't write a long speech. You simply vanished with dignity. And that absence hit harder than any confrontation ever could. Epictetus said it perfectly. No man is free who is not master of himself. And that's what you chose. Self-mastery. You weren't withholding. You were reclaiming. You weren't punishing. You were protecting. When silence becomes your shield, their grip dissolves. Their certainty crumbles. Their sense of control begins to rot from within. So the next time you feel that urge to react, pause. Ask yourself, is this for peace or is this just for attention? Am I standing in my power or am I trading it for closeness? If the answer doesn't serve your self-respect, don't move. Don't explain. Don't chase, stay centered. Stay silent, because the moment you stopped being predictable was the moment everything changed. And from that silence, something even more powerful was born. Scarcity. Scarcity made you valuable. They never had to earn you, and that was the problem. You were always there, quick to respond, quick to forgive, quick to give your energy and time. It made them comfortable, too comfortable. And here's the law of human nature. What is too available is too often undervalued. Not because it lacks worth, but because no effort was required to keep it. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more. That is poor. And nothing stirs craving more than the silence of someone who was once always there." When you withdrew, the shift was immediate. Suddenly, the texts they ignored feel priceless. The memories they dismissed replay endlessly. The attention they took for granted feels irreplaceable. That's what scarcity does. It forces recognition, but this isn't revenge. It's restoration. Restoration of your value. Because when you stop giving yourself away without cost, you stop bleeding self-worth. You remind both them and yourself that your presence is earned, not expected. You are not a convenience. You are not an option. You are the prize, and silence is how that prize reveals itself. It doesn't announce. It doesn't explain. It simply withdraws. And absence says what words never could, so don't rush to fill the gap they now feel. Don't hurry back in because they suddenly notice the silence. Let it stretch. Let it echo. Let it remind them. They didn't lose someone desperate to be seen. They lost someone who finally saw himself. And that realization sets the stage for the next shift. Independence. Independence became your weapon they expected you to unravel. They expected you to break in silence, to crawl back needing answers, needing closure, needing them. But that version of you? Gone. Because you didn't block them in rage. You didn't argue. You didn't chase. You simply stopped needing them. And in doing so, you reclaimed the most powerful thing they never wanted you to find. Yourself. That's what shook them. Not the silence itself, but what it revealed. That your identity wasn't built on their presence. That your life didn't pause when they left the frame. You became the man who kept moving. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. When you embody that truth, the grip of their influence slips. The illusion collapses. Independence isn't loud. It doesn't broadcast. It simply exists. Quiet, steady, untouchable. You're no longer orbiting their moods or reactions. You've stepped out of their gravitational pull entirely, and when they realize you're not angry, you're just done, that's when it hits them. They weren't feeding your soul. They were feeding on your need, and now that the need is gone, so is their power. Your silence wasn't punishment. It was release. It was a declaration. My peace no longer bends to your chaos. Freedom isn't the absence of pain. It's the absence of dependence. That's why independence became your weapon. And once it did, something deeper followed. Respect. They respected what you didn't beg for. You didn't yell. You didn't beg. You didn't deliver a final speech. You chose silence. Not because you lacked words, but because you finally understood your worth didn't require defending. In a world where noise is mistaken for strength, your quiet withdrawal sent a message no one could unhear. I am done. They thought you were sulking. They thought you'd eventually explain yourself again, clarify one last time, plead for understanding. But when you didn't break, when you stayed still, something shifted inside them. Not on the surface, but deep where respect is born. Epictetus once said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. And that's exactly what you embraced. You chose improvement over perception. You were willing to be misunderstood rather than distort yourself just to be accepted. That is why your silence carried weight. Because no one respects the man who begs to be heard. Respect is reserved for the one who sets a boundary and keeps it. The one who will walk alone in peace rather than stay connected in desperation. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. And restraint is power under control. They may never admit it out loud, but deep down they began to respect you. Not because you demanded it, but because you didn't. And that respect laid the foundation for the next shift. The power dynamic flipped. The power dynamic flipped. They were sure you'd come back. Not immediately, but eventually. With a text. With an explanation. With one more attempt to repair what they kept breaking. But this time, you didn't take the bait. You paused. You stayed still. And that one move, your stillness, shifted everything. Because silence doesn't argue. Silence doesn't beg. Silence simply removes energy from the game. And when that energy disappears, the one who thought they had control suddenly finds themselves chasing what they used to ignore. Now they're the ones checking your social media at midnight. Now they're the ones replaying old messages. Now they're the ones wondering who has your attention. Seneca wrote, "Power belongs to the one who needs the least." And you proved it, not by retaliation, not by flexing, by simply removing the supply. You didn't just refuse to play, you exposed the game itself, and that's what flipped the dynamic. You no longer needed their validation. You no longer chased their attention. You became untouchable. But silence doesn't just change the power balance. It creates something else entirely: healing. You found healing in the stillness. They thought your silence was about them, that you were trying to prove a point, that you were waiting for a reaction. But they missed the truth. Your silence wasn't about them. It was about you. Because the moment you stepped out of the noise, you stepped into stillness, and that stillness became your sanctuary. Marcus Aurelius said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." When you stopped feeding their chaos, you finally had space to refine your thoughts, to breathe again. No more circular arguments in your head. No more checking your phone for their approval. Just presence, just clarity, just you. You started hearing your own voice again, the one that had been drowned out by noise and doubt. You weren't waiting in silence. You were healing in it, not to make them miss you, but to rebuild yourself. And while they cycled through distractions, you built peace brick by brick. The storm that once consumed you became the forge where your next version was shaped. So no, you didn't disappear. You evolved. You didn't shrink. You expanded, and while you were healing in silence, something else began to happen on their side: reflection. Silence triggered. Their reflection: you didn't shout. You didn't argue. You didn't beg. You just stopped talking. And that silence became the one thing they couldn't escape. Words can be twisted. Memories can be edited. But silence? Silence is undeniable. And in that space where your voice used to be, something started happening. Their own thoughts turned on them. The certainty they once had, that you'd always return, that your love outweighed your pride, crumbled. Your silence became a mirror, and in it, they saw their own mistakes. Did they push too far? Did they lose something irreplaceable? You never forced that realization. You didn't weaponize silence to manipulate guilt. You simply stopped playing the role, and in doing so, you gave them space to stumble into truth on their own. That's the power of silence. It doesn't demand confession. It invites it. But reflection always leads to fear. Fear that maybe you're not pausing to punish. Fear that maybe you're already gone. And that leads us to the final, most powerful shift. You chose yourself. And that changed everything. They thought your silence was a tactic. A pause. A temporary withdrawal. What they never expected was that your silence had nothing to do with them at all. Because the truth is this: you weren't disappearing to punish. You weren't holding back to manipulate. You were finally choosing yourself. For too long, you had abandoned yourself just to be accepted. You had bent, shrunk, performed, hoping someone would finally see your worth. But when you stopped explaining, stopped proving, stopped showing up just,